At one time, Socrates told me to marry by all means. If you get a good wife, you'll be happy. A bad one will make you a philosopher. The same Münchhausen. Alas, I didn't become a philosopher, but I thought about women more deeply. I figured out my wife purely by accident. I just made a joke and said I knew, because I was following her. Mole saw her get into a waiting car with an unknown man, and not in the subway. And I needed it. It was the 7th year of my married life. It was my son's birthday. He was 5 years old, and suddenly this happened. Thunder rumbled, everything went upside down. And it all started with her regular trip to her friend and classmate Julia, who lived somewhere out of town. She returned after a day, tired, with circles under her eyes, with a slight smell of booze. I could see that the girls had a good time. After my joke, her reaction, I was shocked. She collapsed in a chair, legs trembled, more and more pale, shook, tears flowed. I was able to control myself, and then I started to twist her around in cold blood. "How long have you been with him?" The bitterness of resentment in my throat distorted my words and sounds beyond recognition. I spoke as if in a cave. She was silent for a long time, as if not hearing me, withdrawn into herself, then whispered aloofly, 5 years. Who is he? And silence again in response. I did not torture her anymore, but connected a telephone receiver in parallel on the landing, 1 floor below, just 2 wires, one by one pressing against the common bus. I found my home phone. We didn't have cell phones back then, and a landline phone was the only means of communication available. It was 1998. She called her grandmother. As it turned out, she was an intermediary and was aware of her hobby. Through her, they made arrangements to meet. Listening to the conversation, I found out his name was Seriosa. Heard. Bah, tell Seriosa not to look for me and not to call. I myself will tell them everything. I returned to the apartment with an unfamiliar feeling. It gnawed and burned me from the inside, stabbing and piercing every point in my body. The pain of resentment was replaced by a rage of anger. I remember that my teeth were chattering and my cheekbones were cramping. But I was in control, maybe because I hadn't seen any of this and hoped for a prank. A joke, a lie. I thought that now we will talk to her and everything will be clarified, will be on their usual family ways, but when she saw me, she immediately began to crack without a mind with a feigned calm. Like it was some kind of nonsense and not worth attention. Nonsense and will no longer be so. A mistake. But then she burst into tears again, apparently her distorted face. Taking the icon with which they were married, she knelt in the middle of the room. But I said, "Call your Seriosa. We'll talk at the round family table. I know all about him." She was struck again, as if by an electric shock, and I again took a punt, because I did not know who this man was. "You know he's at work now, where I'll call. It's okay to get him on the phone, invite him over for the evening." Again, I played along with myself. And then I was struck. No, finished a hunch. It's Serioga, my colleague, and friend. After all, I myself had invited him once to visit about 5 years ago, and we have always been happy to him, treated as family, so close that the wife began to share. Just like that, overnight, I lost my friend and most likely my wife. And he is also married with 2 children. Well done, Serioga, great arrangement. So that's why they had such a frightfully guilty look 3 or 4 years ago, when I returned one day earlier than usual and ran into him and his wife at the door of his apartment. They were just coming out. If I had come in half an hour earlier, I probably would have been in jail by now. Or maybe I would have been acquitted. If I'd caught them in the crib in the famous poses, enjoying sex. He came in, brought a bottle of vodka, put it on the table, and didn't take off his jacket. And understandably so. He was a fan of all the fancy gas pistols of the time. His name was hung like Rambo, and they were obviously gnarled in his pockets, so he was afraid. We sat down at the table, Empty this time, no serving, just a bottle of vodka in the middle. You love her. I nod toward my spouse's panorama, standing in the distance. Yes, I've got a quick one in a clod, then I answered with a sound. And you him, without looking at his wife, I asked. I love him. With a sassy note, she answered. Call your wife and call her here. I handed the receiver of the landline Sergei. But Sergei shook his head. Not ready, he said. And understandably, where would he live later? For sure his wife would kick him out of his apartment in his village in the Vologda region. The silence lingered. His refusal to call his wife clearly showed the level of relationship they were in. The boy was clearly having fun. Why? Convenient, and a permanent alibi, because a friend of the family, when I want, I come. I hadn't yet fully grasped the tragedy of what had happened, and hadn't really thought deeply about it. No decision had yet been made. The hatred for him and for her would not settle in my head. I just told him to get out of here. I hope I never meet you in this life again. Seryoza muttered something as he left. No, I think we'll meet again. And cried. In his hand jacket, he closed his eyes and went out the door. It's been 20 years, and we still haven't met, haven't seen each other. He left. And you? Why are you sitting there? Run. Catch up with him. I won't live with you anyway. She sat motionless for a minute, then rushed after. Yes, not her for the first time in my life. In those moments, I was truly alone. Minutes of reflection passed, and for me it was years, the very years that were now so easily thrown away, erased from my life. 7 years flashed before my eyes like an accelerated video. Here was the wedding, congratulations, wishes for family happiness. Here is her grandmother getting me a bouquet of white rosewoods and kissing me on the cheek with the words, "Take care of her." Yes, the same one who mediated. 2 honeymoon years, when we just enjoyed the youthfulness of their bodies, funny and huge 9-month belly, sniffing curdle pulled by a blue bow in my arms. And we are driving him on Zaporozhets from the maternity hospital. A year later, Seryoza came into my life. I myself came up and was the first to talk to the reticent newcomer at work, helped him get used to the new place. And learning that he was forced to huddle at the crazy old woman in a room in the country, offered him to live in my empty apartment. We were living with my mother-in-law, who was helping my wife with the baby at first. I invited him to my birthday party. We became fast friends. It turned out we also served in the same military unit. I was 2 years older than him. He brought fruits and vegetables from his village, often walked with the stroller, and helped his wife carry it. He was ready to fulfill any request to go anywhere, to take or bring what we needed. A dependable guy. In 10 to 15 minutes, my wife came back, didn't catch up or didn't want to. I don't know. I kept thinking hard, the way even you managed. I kept rewinding and rewinding the tape of life and not finding an answer. It turns out that first summer, when I went to visit my relatives in another city, they continued to walk the stroller together and somewhere on the outskirts of our neighborhood. By that pond or right at the apartment. Yes, it was by the pond, but the one on the edge of the street, where the fields start, we used to swim together. He was especially courteous and gentle, affectionate with me, giving me his hand to help me down into the water, catching me when I slipped. I don't even remember how it all happened, and only the letter, the baby from the stroller, brought me back from his embrace. But it was too late. I knew for the first time the man could be so gentle and passionate at the same time, and I always lacked that with you. It was as if, guessing my thoughts, she was having a quiet conversation through herself. She was in her coat, disheveled by the autumn wind, and the raindrops sparkled in her loose hair, as if washed with tears from head to toe. But she was not unhappy. And I was already looking at this woman in a new way. On the one hand, she was still my wife. On the other, a complete stranger whose life was not unknown, and only accidentally exposed for the weight of the mystery. She looked very different too. No, she was clearly not grief-stricken and depressed. On the contrary, through the sparks of tears on her eyelashes, a cold, strong-willed look came through, and those eyes kept saying, "Because you did it all yourself. You're the only one to blame for what happened." We were married too young. Her 19 and my 20s had brought us together as a young family that hadn't had time to experience real life. The drab monotony of everyday life depersonalized the days, and with the birth of a child, we all became ordinary cogs in the family mechanism of routine. We dissolved in the extraction of money, food, clothes. We stopped noticing each other's worlds. Yes, we were together. There was sex in the rare moments of free time, more like an obligatory ritual than a sincere pleasure, and it was not much different from brushing your teeth in the morning. You remember how you began to treat me. And I remembered that in the last 7 years, I had tried to break up my family 3 or 4 times. No, I didn't have anybody on the side. I sought solitude, quit my job, and went to my native land. I did not like this city, its rhythm. I constantly blamed my discomfort on my wife, her overactive desire to marry me, which was the case. I wanted my old state back, the one I had lived in before I was married, and I did not hide my desire from her. We met shortly before the army. I came to visit this town, saw her, and fell ill with her. We spent a few days and nights together. There was everything except sex. I fell in love with this girl with a huge brown braid. She was 17 years old. No one had ever cared about me like that in my youth. We wrote frequent letters, and she was waiting for me. I found out later that she had bought a wedding dress, though there was no thought of a wedding. But when she found out that I had realized my dream after 1 year of service and had entered the military college, the letters came less often and their content was blaming. Soon they stopped altogether. My last letter reproached me that they didn't think, and that she didn't want to spend time in garrisons and military bases all over the USSR. I was absorbed in my studies and did not think about anything else. A cadet in the Soviet Army was not supposed to think about his personal life. The state and his father's commanders did it for him. The time was already uneasy. It was 90, the state system was cracking, and even we, cadets, began to notice it. They canceled the compulsory membership in the Komsomol and the party. They started letting you go on leave with a sleepover. She used to come to the school all of a sudden, having traveled a few thousand kilometers with bags full of homemade delicacies. She stood waiting for me at the checkpoint, exhausted from the long journey and the weight of the heavy bags. I hadn't seen her for over a year, and I confess, I didn't recognize her at first. I was released for 2 whole days on leave, and we checked into a hotel. There was no crawling out of bed, caressing, and kissing. But my frank onslaught and desire for more was repulsed by her, and I got nothing out of her. Yes, we were both virgins and still were. But she reached her goal, managed to convince me to quit school and come to live with her. Homemade buns, pies in the arena, stories about another beautiful life did their job. I decided to write a report on my graduation from military school. The intoxicating taste and warmth of a young woman's body kept my lips, eyes, fingers. It made me think of nothing else but to return to her as soon as possible. And now we were 2 strangers sitting and looking at each other, as if getting to know each other again, studying faces. Yes, my wife had cheated on me, and there was nothing I could do about it. And the devil made me make such a joke, or maybe not the devil, because all the same symptoms are not from your jealousy I have experienced before. How could I forget? The night before, in the middle of the night, I woke up in a sweat. I was shaking and shaking from the dream, or rather, the very feeling and sensation. I don't remember the dream, but my wife was clearly there, and exactly the same blow of searing resentment I received today. The dream was too late. Already, apparently, heaven was tired of the lies, the deceitfulness of the woman married to me. I told my wife about it at the time, and she was really wary, reacting in an unusually frightened way. Now, 2 decades later, I am glad that I met and survived the disaster in cold blood, even though I had a hot temper. At 27 years of age, I did not arrange a brawl. I did not lynch an unfaithful Nakhaneshnya, for a luxurious scythe did not fall out into the street, fought ways in the history of nations to punish the wife and her lover. I was not drunk, but I was living in a sticky fog of conflicting thoughts and feelings. The future was confused before me, and I could not understand what to do next. My thoughts were beating like flies against the glass, flying into the light and not finding a way out. I asked someone for advice, so I went to the church. A gray-haired clump with a huge cross on a chain listened with a wise look. "What's the use of a wife like that now? Throw her out," the beard said in a thunderous celestial bass. "But you are a wife of a pig. Find another." I left the abode of God with the same burden as I entered. The next day, the first thing I did was to go home to my abuser. I had no clear plan. I allowed any development of the situation up to a fair death, on fists, on knives, even with fountain pens. But I needed satisfaction for the insult. And this is not a belated reaction to wave my fists after a fight that didn't happen, but a deliberate, unavoidable sacrifice. His or mine. He lived 20 minutes away. Noticed how convenient. By the time I left for work, the bed wasn't even cold yet, and he was already in it thanks to his floating work schedule. But the door was opened by his own Antone, little one with a pancake-shaped and flattened face. I frankly didn't like her. We were acquainted because she worked in our canteen as a waitress, where she met Sergei, married him after a month or two of acquaintance. Kolya, she was obviously surprised because it was my second time there. "Come in, make yourself at home." And she went into the kitchen, where something hissed and smelled disgustingly of onions. The owner was clearly not at home. Immediately, all the inhabitants of the apartment jumped out at me in the hallway. First, a pale cat covered with stains of green, a black tabby dog, an old woman in a wide skirt, 2 children, about 3 or 4 years old, were holding onto the hem, just like the cat, with spots of green on their faces and hands, obviously sick with chicken pox. The little ones looked at me with frank amazement. I fell into a kind of stupor at what I saw. It had completely slipped my mind that he had a family, children, an aunt, who lived with him in a 2-bedroom apartment, and a cat and a dog. The stripped wallpaper hung in dirty ribbons along the walls. The greasy doors with broken handles, and the smell of cats and frying onions everywhere. Why had I come here? Driven by an impulse together. What the hell? And Serioso went to his mother in the village. He asked for a week off from work. You need him urgently. I heard Tony's voice behind me. Something's wrong. You look unwell. I almost didn't understand her. I couldn't hear her. It was the heat or the burning oil and onions. I felt sick. Now, years later, I blame myself for that visit. Maybe the drowsiness and weakness clouded my mind. I frankly regret that day, or rather, that I could not keep my mouth shut. It was unmanly to complain to a woman about her husband. She took me to the kitchen, where I felt even worse, realized that something was wrong with me, and asked me point blank, "Something's wrong, I see. Don't keep quiet. Your Sergei and my wife are lovers." You think this surprised and upset her? Not much. She just started calming me down, stroking my hair like a child, with an onion hand and the other on my knee, increasingly clinging to my robe. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to get back at them. Right here and now, huh? This was probably the first time in my life that I refused to have sex, regardless of the unequivocal idea of doing right now. Understand, they've been in love for a long time. We can't stop them anymore. They're going to get married. So you've known it all for a long time, and you knew it. This news made my face twist even more. What's going on, anyway? Who are you to him then? And then I heard who for whom and to whom. She said that Tanya had had a crush on me a long time ago. But I was married and didn't pay any attention to her. I remembered her frequent smiles from the paper kokoshnik crawling up to her forehead, shooting her eyes in the canteen, and the desire to put the best bits on the tray. and with Serioja's arrival, she was already grooming us both like that. A couple of months later, they got married in a strange way, without banquets or guests, quietly and unnoticed. Serioja moved out of my apartment to hers, and she, as I said before, lived in the same neighborhood as me, within walking distance of 15 to 20 minutes. I knew he badly needed a residence permit. There were problems at work because of it. The wedding was clearly effective, a performance, and accomplished several things. One of them, to be closer to my wife, with whom he was already having an affair, spelled him out to the city and a number of domestic ones. He made no secret of his relationship with my wife. She knew everything and helped them get together. But also his friendship with Tony turned into a relationship, and then she got pregnant despite his protests, left him, and had a baby, complicating things. Maybe on purpose, the husband that he's legit, even though he's sleeping with two broads. Our couple, still reeling from this twist, gets Tony's second pregnancy. Serioja got bogged down in the daily life of the family. Trips to get baby food, lack of money, working two jobs, lack of time for my wife. The question of divorce was hanging in the air. The law of the birth of children was clearly not part of the plans, and my wife's new husband, Alamanchik, with two infants, was clearly not in the joy. At her pleas for a quick divorce, he had already begun to crumple. They were seeing each other less and less frequently. Sometimes once a season, or even half a year, they couldn't make the time. She realized that she had Sergei on the hook. He could no longer leave and stay without a residence permit with two children. I left, or rather ran away from the smell of burning onions. I do not remember how, with even more weight of questions drilling into my head. So it really is not just sex, but a blitzkrieg of some kind against me. At home, there was a whole rescue team or support group of my wife, called by her, in case of my wrongdoing, mostly her uncle's aunts. Even 80-year-old grandmother, the liaison came, looked at me silently, sternly, scowling. It was clear that a conversation with my wife would not work. I turned around and left, got in the car and drove into the night, just where the eyes looked, and they were looking in the direction of one of her friends. That recently at a party, under the table I scratched a shoe, and on the walk unnoticed grabbed the fingers of my hand. She was the only one who was married, but I didn't think about her man. Came to the vegetable garden. I think if he's there, just drink, and I'll at least cry, but no, so his wife. I could not reveal my soul no more. I vomited in my chest, and the hot brew of my thoughts was asking to go out. I wanted to tell at least a dog in the yard. Lenka opened the door, let me in. She was alone, understood, felt sorry for a long time, and soon after drinking the bottle, made a bed for me. I will sleep in the other room, and my husband is away on a business trip. We will not say anything to him. I did not pester her. The events knocked me out, barely undressed, fell asleep, woke up in the middle of the night from the stirring under the covers. Someone, and I guessed who, felt his hands on me. I can't have a man sleeping apart like that, so I continued the caressing. We parted in the morning, both of us sleep-deprived, wrinkled, and a little ashamed to stare intently into each other's eyes. I went home, where I was met by my own strange wife, dinner candles, and sex like I had never had with her before. So the value of it for me and now, after 20 years, is not, and together we are 27 years. We are all good, except I never kiss her on the lips, and she knows why. Those events, oddly enough, have only strengthened our union. I got a new wife who cares and thinks about me for two. And I got two women in her one person, a wonderful mistress and wife. 9 years ago, we had a beautiful baby girl in the family, and our son is now 25. Such was the storm that threatened to drown many fates in the glass. And thank you, Serioja, for discovering and giving me such a woman. Now I understand why you cried when you left. I'm sorry, dear, but you need such a woman for yourself.